Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to impartially unpack the Catholic theological framework regarding the papacy. Now, whenever people look at this ancient institution, the conversation almost immediately jumps to a debate about power and control. But the source material we're digging into today actually shifts that focus completely. So instead of getting bogged down in who has authority, we're going to look at a framework designed to answer a much deeper question, one about lasting Christian unity.
Right, so this central question really sets the stage for our entire explainer today. At its core, this isn't just about who gets to be the boss. It's about exploring how this incredibly ancient institution designed a visible center of communion to solve a very real, very human problem: division. You see, Catholics and Orthodox Christians actually agree on way more than they disagree on. They both deeply cherish the apostles, the sacraments, apostolic succession, all of that. The main divergence really just comes down to this one question of how unity is preserved, and specifically the role of Peter and his successors.
To wrap our heads around this, here's our roadmap. We'll start with the quest for unity, move on to Peter and the apostles, look at the need for a conductor, explore authority as loving service, and finally, the path to communion. Let's jump right in.
Okay, Section 1, the quest for unity. Let's look at the foundational goal of the Church here.
Our source material points straight to the Gospel of John, where Jesus explicitly prays for unity. And this is a massive foundation, because it shows that, according to Catholic teaching, the Church was never meant to be just some loose, fragmented collection of individual opinions. Unity, in this context, isn't just a nice administrative bonus. It is literally the proof of the Christian witness to the rest of the world.
The Catholic Catechism teaches that the Pope is the perpetual and visible source and foundation of the unity. So the Catholic belief is that Christ established both the College of the Apostles as a whole and Peter as its visible head. The key takeaway here? They are completely complementary realities. They aren't competing against each other at all.
Moving on to Section 2, Peter and the Apostles. Let's break down how Catholic teaching interprets the biblical blueprint for this leadership structure.
So Jesus chose the 12 apostles to represent the 12 tribes of Israel, and every single one of them shared in that overarching mission. But at the exact same time, Peter is singled out, he's called the Rock, and he's handed the keys of the kingdom of heaven in Matthew 16. This framework suggests that these two realities coexist perfectly. You've got this beautiful shared mission among the 12, but with a highly unique, specific task entrusted to just one of them.
And we see this unique task pop up again in these really direct commands from Jesus to Peter. After the resurrection, Jesus tells Peter 3 separate times to feed my sheep. And even before his passion, he says, I have prayed for you, strengthen your brethren. Now, the absolutely crucial thing to understand here is that these passages aren't viewed as diminishing the other apostles. Not at all. Instead, they point to a specialized ministry of support. It's Peter's duty to strengthen the others for the sake of the entire church.
We actually get to see this dynamic play out in real time at the Council of Jerusalem in Acts 15. Picture this. First, Peter steps up and settles the core doctrinal question, declaring that Gentiles are saved through God's grace, not the Mosaic law. Step 2, the scripture notes that the whole assembly fell silent. And then step 3, James, who is the bishop of Jerusalem, proposes the practical application of this. It's a team effort. The bishops govern together, but always, according to this view, in tight communion with Peter's successor.
All right, Section 3, the need for a conductor. Let's look at the psychology and the history behind why they felt this structure was so necessary.
St. Thomas Aquinas came up with this brilliant metaphor for the principle of unity, and honestly, it hits the nail right on the head. Think of a massive, world-class orchestra. You can have dozens of the most incredibly gifted musicians on stage, but if you want actual harmony instead of just a wall of noise, you absolutely need one conductor. In this framework, the Church has tons of brilliant bishops, but it needs one visible center of communion to make sure everyone is playing the same piece of music. And the reason we even need that conductor just comes down to basic human nature. St. Augustine pointed out centuries ago that human pride inevitably leads to division when everyone insists on being their own absolute boss. And what's fascinating is that modern psychology totally backs this up. Studies show that any group lacking a clear, recognized way of resolving disputes is just naturally going to fragment over time. I mean, look at history. Disagreements over doctrine have proven this reality time and time again.
Because of this very human tendency to fracture, the need for a unifying center was recognized super early on. Way back in the 2nd century, St. Irenaeus of Lyons wrote that every church needed to agree with Rome because of its more excellent origin. A bit later, St. Cyprian of Carthage famously called Rome the chair of Peter. Now, sure, historical debates definitely exist around this, but these texts clearly show that Rome's unique unifying role was an established idea way back in historical antiquity.
Section 4. Authority as loving service. So, if there is a central authority, how is it actually wielded? Well, the source material completely reframes this.
Pope St. Gregory the Great captured the vibe of this perfectly when he said, "I am the servant of the servants of God." Catholic teaching flat out rejects the idea of a dictatorship within the Church. The Pope isn't some corporate CEO with unchecked, unlimited power. He is strictly bound by Scripture, sacred tradition, and divine revelation. The entire role exists to be a servant to the faith, not the owner of it.
And to make sure that that authority isn't abused, the Catholic framework has some serious built-in balances. Papal primacy doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It's carefully weighed against the shared, collegial authority of the bishops, the day-to-day autonomy of local churches, the massive collective decisions of ecumenical councils, and the strict boundaries of canon law. Authority here is explicitly designed to serve truth and communion, never personal power.
That brings us to Section 5, the path to communion. How exactly does this theology impact relations with other Christians in the modern day?
As Pope Benedict XVI beautifully noted, truth and love belong together. The source text is super clear about this. Triumphalism and pride have absolutely zero place in this theological framework. Pope St. John Paul II frequently emphasized that Orthodox churches are sister churches, and he deeply longed for full communion. In this view, defending doctrine isn't about being arrogant. It requires profound humility, patience, and absolute respect for others who love Christ.
So, the ultimate goal of this entire framework is never to just win a theological argument. The Catholic path forward is all about actively cultivating these core virtues. You choose humility over pride, charity over hostility, and prudence over rash judgment. And you do all of that while maintaining fortitude in truth and a very real, deep hope for reunion. It's all about deepening communion, not scoring debate points.
And Pope Francis reminds us of something absolutely essential here. Unity does not mean uniformity. Drawing on St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, the Church is viewed as one body, but with wildly diverse members. The central authority of the papacy doesn't exist to turn everyone into identical clones. It exists simply to ensure that all that beautiful diversity remains securely and safely united in one shared faith.
To wrap this all up, this framework isn't just about picking between one man or 12 apostles. It's an entirely complementary system designed to preserve visible unity in a really fractured world. But it leaves us with an incredibly compelling question to chew on. In our highly individualized, hyper-modern era, is this ancient model of a single, unifying conductor more necessary than ever, or just harder than ever to achieve? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and as always, keep exploring.